I stood on the catwalk, the heat singing the hair on my arms. As the owner handed me a termination letter, he laughed, thinking he'd just saved a few bucks. He didn't realize he was standing over a 50-ton bomb that only I knew how to defuse. So, instead of begging, I cut the mixers and turned his inheritance into the world's largest paperweight. You don't just work in a steel mill, you survive it. For 30 years, I had survived the Clark Steel Foundry. I knew the rhythm of the place like I knew the beat of my own heart. It was a rhythm of thundering drop hammers, the hiss of hydraulic presses, and the deep, resonant hum of the blast furnace that sat in the center of the factory like a hungry god. It was 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the floor temperature was already pushing 110 degrees. I wiped a mixture of sweat and soot from my forehead with a rag that had been gray when I bought it, but was now permanently black. "Pressure is holding steady at 4,500, James," Adrian said, his voice crackling over my headset. Adrian was up in the crane, 50 feet above me, moving scraps of iron with the precision of a surgeon. He was one of the good ones, quiet, observant, and respectful of the danger we lived in. "Copy that, Adrian," I replied, my voice rough from inhaling graphite dust for 3 decades. "Keep it steady. We've got 50 tons of high-carbon soup cooking in there. If the mixers stop for more than 10 minutes, we lose the batch." I walked the perimeter of the primary blast furnace. It was a massive, towering cylinder of reinforced ceramic and steel, glowing with a dull, angry red light at the seams. Inside, iron ore, coke, and limestone were being smelted at nearly 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It was liquid death, and it was my job to keep it contained. I wasn't just a foreman, I was the plant superintendent. I knew every valve, every relay, and every groaning bolt in this building. I knew that the number 3 cooling pump had a slight wobble when it rained, and I knew that the east wall vibrated whenever a train passed 3 miles away. But lately, the atmosphere had changed. The air felt heavier, and it wasn't the humidity. Old man Clark, the founder, had passed away 6 months ago. He was a hard man, but fair. He respected the steel. His nephew, Julian Clark, respected nothing but the bottom line. Julian had inherited the company and immediately started bringing in his team. I looked up toward the glass-walled administrative offices that overlooked the factory floor. They called it the fishbowl. I could see silhouettes moving up there, suits, clean hands, people who thought steel was made by pressing a button on a spreadsheet. "James," a voice called out behind me. I turned to see Luna, the new safety compliance officer. She was young, ambitious, and held a clipboard like a weapon. She was wearing a hard hat that looked like it had never deflected anything harder than a raindrop. "We need to talk about the railing on Sector 4, she said, not meeting my eyes. "It's not up to code." "The railing is fine, Luna," I said, pointing my gloved hand toward the mixing control panel. "I welded it myself last week. It could stop a truck." "My report says otherwise," she muttered, scribbling something down. She looked nervous. Her eyes darted toward the fishbowl. My stomach tightened. In this industry, you develop a sixth sense for disaster. Usually it's a drop in pressure or a smell of ozone before a circuit blows. Today the warning sign was Luna refusing to look at me. I checked my watch. 10:15 a.m., the furnace was at peak melt. The massive graphite mixers were churning the molten liquid, keeping it from settling, keeping it alive. "Just fix it, James," she said, turning away quickly. "Just be careful today." She walked away fast, almost running. I watched her go, a cold feeling settling in my gut that had nothing to do with the air conditioning I didn't have. Something was wrong. The mill was loud, screaming with the noise of industry. But suddenly, I felt very alone. The summons came 15 minutes later. The PA system crackled, cutting through the roar of the overhead fans. "James Harris, report to the central catwalk immediately. James Harris to the catwalk." It wasn't the administrative office. It was the catwalk, the metal grate bridge that ran directly over the open top of the blast furnace. It was the loudest, hottest, and most dangerous place in the entire facility. Nobody held meetings there. You only went up there to inspect the charging bells or to fix a jammed sensor. I looked up. Standing on the grate, 60 feet in the air, were 2 figures. Even from this distance, I recognized the tailored cut of an Italian suit, Julian Clark. Next to him was his cousin, Josiah Clark, a man who had been appointed Director of Efficiency, despite having never done an honest day's work in his life. I tapped my headset. "Adrian, You see this? I see 'em, boss, Adrian replied, his voice low. They're looking down at you like kids watching an anthill. Watch your back. Keep the crane steady, Adrian. Don't let that ladle drift. I began the climb. The stairs were steep, made of diamond plate steel that clanged under my heavy work boots. Each step took me higher into the rising heat. By the second flight, the air was thick and tasted of sulfur. By the third flight, the temperature had jumped 20 degrees. My knees ached. I was 55 years old. My body was a map of scars and stiff joints, earned in service to this building. I had missed anniversaries, birthdays, and school plays to keep this furnace running. I had saved this factory from floods, power outages, and mechanical failures that should have bankrupted the company. I reached the top landing and stepped onto the catwalk. The heat was a physical weight here, pressing against my chest. Below us, through the heavy grating, I could see the orange glow of the molten steel churning in the vat. The mixers thumped rhythmically, thud swish, a heartbeat of liquid fire. Julian was leaning against the railing, looking bored. He held a white handkerchief over his nose to block the smell. Josiah was tapping away on a tablet, looking like he was playing a video game. "James!" Julian shouted over the roar of the furnace. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't smile. "Julian?" I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "You picked a hell of a place for a chat. It's 140 degrees up here." "We like the view," Josiah smirked, finally looking up from his tablet. He had the soft face of a man who slept till noon. "It really gives you a sense of the scale of our overhead." "Is there a problem with the melt?" I asked, wiping sweat from my eyes. "Because if not, I need to be down there monitoring the oxygen lances." Julian pushed off the railing. He stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and arrogance. "The melt is fine, James," Julian said. "The problem is you." I stiffened. "Excuse me?" "We've been reviewing the numbers," Julian shouted, gesturing vaguely around the factory. "The legacy costs, the pension obligations, the old ways of doing things." "The old ways are why this factory hasn't exploded," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I run a safe floor." "You run an expensive floor," Josiah corrected. "And according to the report filed by Luna this morning, you're also running a negligent one." I felt the blood rush to my face. "That report is garbage. Luna doesn't know a weld from a rivet." "It's an official document," Julian said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Gross negligence, safety violations, insubordination." I looked at the paper. I didn't take it. I knew what it was. "You're doing this now?" I asked, incredulous. "In the middle of a 50-ton pour? If I leave, there's nobody certified to manage the mixture." Julian laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Oh, please, it's a machine, James. It runs itself. Josiah here has the manual." I looked at Josiah. He looked terrified of the sparks flying up from the pit, flinching every time a pop sounded from below. He didn't have a manual. He barely had a spine. "You have no idea what you're doing," I warned them. "I know exactly what I'm doing," Julian sneered. Julian shoved the paper against my chest. I instinctively grabbed it before it could flutter over the railing and incinerate in the heat rising from below. "You're fired, James," Julian said, the words clear and sharp despite the industrial cacophony. "Effective immediately, causes termination for safety negligence, which means—" He paused, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Which means we are voiding your pension, and your severance." The world seemed to stop spinning. The roar of the furnace faded into a dull buzz. 30 years. I thought about my back surgery 2 years ago, paid for out of pocket because the insurance fought me. I thought about the nights I slept on a cot in the break room during the blizzard of 22 to keep the pipes from freezing. I thought about the retirement I had been planning, the small boat I wanted to buy, gone in a second, stolen by a man in a $3,000 suit who was sweating through his silk shirt. "You're firing me for cause," I repeated slowly, based on a lie. "Based on the paperwork," Josiah said, finally finding his voice. "It's all legal. Kinsley, our lawyer, made sure of it." "Now," Julian waved his hand dismissively toward the stairs. "Get out of my factory, escort yourself out, or I call security to drag you out, and leave your badge and keys on the desk." I looked at the paper in my hand. Then I looked down through the grate. 50 tons of molten steel, a liquid asset worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in raw material alone, and millions in finished product. Right now, it was a liquid. It was fluid. It was moving because the massive electric mixers were churning it. If those mixers stopped, the steel would begin to cool. It wouldn't happen instantly. It would take hours. It would turn from a liquid into a thick sludge, and then finally into a solid 50-ton block of iron hard enough to stop a tank. If that happened inside the furnace would never run again. You can't chip 50 tons of steel out of a ceramic pot. You have to dynamite the building and start over. You want me to leave immediately? I asked. Right now, Julian barked. Get off my catwalk. Okay, I said. My voice was calm. Strangely calm. I'm leaving. I turned toward the control pedestal that stood at the end of the catwalk. It was the emergency override station. It controlled the power to the agitators, the mixers. What are you doing? Josiah asked, stepping back. Shutting down my station, I lied. Standard procedure. I walked over to the panel. There was a large red switch under a plastic safety cover. It was labeled Agitator Power, Emergency Cut Off. I looked at Julian one last time. He was checking his phone, already bored with destroying my life. He had no respect for the physics of the world he owned. He thought money was the only power that mattered. I flipped the plastic cover up. Goodbye, Julian, I said. I grabbed the heavy switch and slammed it down. K-thunk. The sound was mechanical and final. Beneath us, the rhythmic thud swish of the mixers stopped instantly. The hum of the motors died. The silence that followed was louder than the noise had been. What did you do? Julian yelled, looking around as the vibration in the floor ceased. Why did the noise stop? I'm leaving, I said, walking past him toward the stairs. And I'm taking my expertise with me. Turn it back on, Josiah screamed. I can't, I said, starting my descent. I don't work here anymore. Unauthorized personnel aren't allowed to touch the equipment. Safety regulations, you know. I left them standing there, bewildered, above a pot of gold that was slowly, inevitably, turning into a tombstone. The silence in a steel mill is terrifying. It's not a peaceful quiet. It's a breathless void where a monster used to breathe. When I threw that switch, the deep, chest-rattling vibration of the agitators vanished instantly. The floor beneath our feet, which usually trembled like a living thing, went dead still. What did you do? Julian screamed, his voice cracking. He lunged toward the panel, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the diamond plate grating. I stepped sideways, putting my shoulder between him and the controls. I wasn't fighting him. I was just following protocol. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my lockout-tagout kit, a red padlock and a heavy warning tag. Step back, Julian, I said, my voice cutting through the ringing in our ears. This equipment is now de-energized. Turn it back on, Josiah yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the console. You can't just turn off a blast furnace? I didn't turn off the furnace, I corrected him calmly, snapping the shackle of my red padlock through the hole in the switch handle. I turned off the mixers. The furnace is still hot, but without the mixers, the temperature distribution is going to fail. I clicked the lock shut. Snap. That sound was louder than the shout. In the industrial world, a lockout-tagout is sacred. It means do not touch under penalty of a federal law. It meant that switch was mechanically fused in the off position until the owner of the lock, me, decided to remove it. Or until they came with bolt cutters, which would take time they didn't have. Give me the key, Julian demanded, grabbing my arm. I looked at his hand on my sleeve, then up at his face. My eyes were cold. You fired me, Julian. That means I am no longer an authorized operator. Unauthorized personnel cannot operate Class A machinery. I am locking this out for your safety. You wouldn't want an accident while you look for my replacement. I pulled my arm away. He stumbled back, looking at the red lock like it was a venomous snake. You're fired! Julian sputtered, realizing he had lost control of the physical situation. You can't be here. I'm going, I said. I took the key, a small silver piece of jagged metal, and held it up. But this key leaves with me. It's personal property. I turned my back on them. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to unlock it, to get the flow moving, to save the heat. But I forced my legs to move toward the stairs. If you leave, Julian roared behind me, I will sue you for every dime you have. I will bury you. I paused at the top of the stairs and looked back. You already took my pension, Julian. You can't take what I don't have. But you do have 50 tons of molten steel. I'd suggest you find a ladle operator fast. It starts getting chunky in about 20 minutes. I descended the stairs, listening to the factory die. Usually the air around the blast furnace is a chaotic storm of sparks and noise. Now, the only sound was the hiss of the gas injectors and the frantic shouting of Julian and Josiah on the catwalk above. They were banging on the control panel, uselessly hitting the plastic cover. I looked at the vat as I passed the mid-level inspection port. Steel is a finicky beast. At 2,800 degrees, it flows like water. But the moment it stops moving, it begins to die. The thermal currents stop. The edges, touching the cooler ceramic bricks of the furnace lining, begin to darken immediately. I could see it happening already. A thin gray film, the skull, was starting to form on the surface of the melt. It looked like skin on cooling cocoa, but this skin was made of iron carbide and slag. Once that skull formed, it would trap the heat irregularly. The bottom would cool faster than the middle. The mixture would separate. The chemical bonds would crystallize. If they didn't get those mixers running in 15 minutes, the motor shafts, massive tungsten rods buried deep in the liquid, would seize. The cooling steel would grip them like a vice. Once the steel grabbed those shafts, no motor on Earth could turn them. The furnace would become a solid block, a monolith. "James!" I looked down. Adrian had climbed out of his crane cab and was standing on the floor level, looking pale. He had seen the whole thing. "Boss," Adrian whispered as I reached the bottom step, "the mixers are down. The temp gauges are dropping on the south wall. What the hell is happening?" "I'm out, Adrian," I said, stripping off my heavy heat-resistant gloves. "Julian fired me, cut my pension, the whole works." Adrian's jaw dropped. He looked up at the catwalk, where Julian was now screaming into his cell phone. "He fired you? In the middle of a melt?" "He wants to save money," I said, tossing my gloves onto a workbench. "So I saved him my salary." "Listen to me, Adrian. This is important." I leaned in close. The air was still sweltering, but a strange chill was creeping in. "Do not touch that lock," I ordered. "If he orders you to cut it, you tell him you're not certified for high-voltage bypass. Do not let him make this your fault. Let him bring in his own scabs to fix it." Adrian nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the standoff. "The batch is going to rock up, James. If that hardens, it'll total the furnace. The expansion alone will crack the foundation." "I know," I said. I looked at the massive vessel one last time. It was a $50 million machine, and I had just given it a terminal diagnosis. "It's going to be a hell of a paperweight." "They're coming down," Adrian warned, glancing at the stairs. "I'm gone," I said. "Keep your head down, kid. Call me if you need a reference." I walked away from the heat toward the locker room. Behind me, the furnace let out a loud crack, the sound of the ceramic lining shifting as the thermal stress began to change. It sounded like a gunshot. The walk from the floor to the locker room was usually a time to decompress, to joke with the guys. Today it was a funeral procession of one. I pushed through the double doors into the locker room. It smelled of stale coffee and Gojo hand cleaner. I went to my locker, number 001. I'd had it since the day the place opened. I didn't rush. I wanted to be meticulous. I took my framed photo of my late wife Martha off the shelf. I took my spare boots. I took my coffee mug. I left the company manuals. I left the schematics I had drawn up for the new intake valves. I left the keys to the supply cage on the bench. "James?" I turned. It was Big Mike Kowalski, the union steward for the floor. He was a mountain of a man, covered in grease. "Word is spreading fast," Mike said, his voice low. "Jerry the Rat is telling people you sabotaged the line." "Jerry is a liar," I said, zipping up my duffel bag. "I was terminated. I followed safety protocol and locked out my station upon exit. If Julian wants to run the plant, he can run it. I'm just a visitor now." Mike looked at the bag, then at my face. He saw the anger burning behind my eyes. He nodded. "They cut the pension?" "Every cent." Mike spat on the floor. "Then let it burn, or freeze, I guess. You need me to walk you out? Make sure security doesn't get handsy?" "I can handle myself, Mike, but do me a favor. Tell the boys to stay clear of the blast zone. When that slag hardens, the pressure valves on the gas lines are going to get confused. The sensors are going to think the flow is blocked and spike the pressure. It might blow a gasket." "I'll pull the crew back," Mike promised. "We'll take an early lunch, a very long lunch." I nodded and walked out of the locker room, down the long concrete hallway that led to the employee exit. I could hear the alarm starting now, a low, rhythmic whoop, whoop, whoop. General system failure. I pushed open the heavy steel door and stepped out into the daylight. The sun was blinding. The air was cool, 70 degrees compared to the 120 inside. The contrast made me shiver. I walked to my truck, a beat-up Ford 10 years older than Julian's suit. As I threw my bag into the passenger seat, I looked back at the factory. Smoke was venting from the emergency stacks, black, unrefined soot. The system was choking. I saw a figure run out of the side door, Jerry the Rat, probably running to get bolt cutters. He was too late. Even if they cut the lock now, the bottom 2 feet of that steel would be sludge. The motors wouldn't turn. They'd strip the gears if they tried. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. I didn't peel out. I didn't speed. I put it in drive and rolled out of the lot at exactly 15 miles per hour, the speed limit. I checked the dashboard clock. 11:05 a.m. I had been unemployed for 45 minutes, and Julian Clark had just lost a $50 million asset. But as I drove away, a nagging thought hit me. Julian hadn't just been angry, he'd been panicked in a way that didn't fit. He wasn't just worried about the steel, he was worried about something else. I remembered the gas lines Mike and I talked about. Julian had been obsessively checking the pressure regulators on the south wall all week. Why would a CEO care about gas intake valves? I shook my head. Not my problem, not anymore. I pulled my phone out and dialed the one number I knew I needed. "Sarge," I said when the line clicked open. "It's James. I need to cash in that favor." I didn't turn the radio on for music. I had a heavy-duty UHF scanner mounted under the dash of my truck, programmed to the mill's internal frequencies. It was a habit from the days when I needed to know if the night shift was dealing with a derailment before I even pulled into the lot. Now, as I drove toward the highway, the scanner was my window into the hell I had left behind. "Pressure is spiking in Sector 3. The valves are seizing." That was Adrian. He sounded calm, but tight. "Just hit the override. Hit the damn button." That was Josiah. He sounded like a child whose toy had just broken. "I'm telling you, the override is locked out. The system reads a manual disconnect. We can't bypass without the key or cutting the loop. And maintenance can't find the bolt cutters." I cracked a smile. I knew exactly where the bolt cutters were. They were in the supply cage, which I had locked. The keys to the cage were on the bench in the locker room, exactly where they were supposed to be. But in their panic, nobody had thought to look there. They were probably tearing the maintenance shed apart while the steel slowly suffocated the machinery. "Temperature at the base is dropping," another voice cut in. Big Mike. "We've lost fluidity. The slag line is solidifying. Mr. Clark, the paddles are stuck. The motors are redlining." "Force them!" Julian's voice tore through the speaker, distorted by rage and static. "I don't care about the motors. Spin the mix." I winced. That was the command of a man who didn't understand physics. You cannot force a tungsten paddle through semi-solid steel. A few seconds later, a terrible grinding screech came over the open channel, followed by a loud pop that sounded like a cannon shot. "There goes the gearbox on Mixer 2, Mike said, his voice flat. "She's dead. Shaft snapped. We are officially static." Static. The word hung in the cab of my truck. The blast furnace was no longer a vessel of production. It was now a cooling coffin. The 50 tons of molten iron inside had begun the irreversible process of thermal contraction. As it cooled, it would shrink, pulling the ceramic lining of the furnace walls with it. "Evacuate the floor," Mike ordered, ignoring Julian. "She's gonna groan. Everyone out." I reached over and clicked the scanner off. I didn't need to hear the rest. I knew the sound of a dying mill. It was the sound of a legacy crumbling because a rich kid thought he knew better than the men who built it. But the silence in the cab brought back the question that had been nagging me. Why had Julian been so desperate to fire me right then? You don't fire your lead smelter in the middle of a pour unless you want the pour to fail. Or unless you want something else to happen, and you need the guy who would stop it out of the building. Roman Young didn't look like a fixer. He looked like a librarian who lifted weights. He ran a small forensic engineering firm out of a converted warehouse in the industrial district, about 5 miles from the mill. When I pulled up, the bay door was open. Roman, everyone called him Sarge because of his time in the Army Corps of Engineers, was under the hood of a classic Pontiac GTO. I walked in, the smell of clean oil and old dust comforting me. "She's purring rich," I called out. "Carburetor needs a turn." Roman slid out from under the car on a creeper. He was a compact man with graying temples and eyes that missed nothing. He wiped his hands on a rag and stood up. "James," he said, not smiling. He read my face instantly. "You look like you just walked out of a fire." "Walked out of a job," I corrected. "Julian Clark fired me an hour ago." Roman paused, the rag still in his hand. "Mid-shift? With the heat in the pot?" "Above the blast furnace," I said. He handed me the slip on the catwalk, told me I was negligent, cut my pension, voided my severance. Roman threw the rag onto the workbench. It landed with a heavy thud. "That's a declaration of war. What did you do?" "I locked out the mixers," I said. "Standard safety procedure for an unauthorized exit. I took the key. The batch is rocking up as we speak. 50 tons of scrap." Roman let out a low whistle. "You bricked the furnace. That's a $50 million screw you." "He tried to steal 30 years of my life, Sarge. I just followed the rule book." "I know you, James," Roman said, walking over to his office, a glass cube in the corner of the shop. "You don't do things out of spite. You do them out of precision. If you lock that out, it's because he gave you no choice. But if he has good lawyers, he's going to come for everything you own. Your house, your truck. He'll try to put you in jail for sabotage." "That's why I'm here," I said, following him. "I need you to look at something." Before I left, something felt off. Julian wasn't just arrogant. He was scared. Roman sat behind his desk, which was covered in blueprints and legal pads. "Scared of what? Losing a batch?" "No," I said, sitting opposite him. "Scared of the gas pressure. For a week, he's been obsessed with the intake valves on the south wall. And when I left today, he had his cousin Josiah running the panel. Josiah doesn't know a regulator from a thermostat. Why put an idiot at the controls unless you want the controls to fail?" Roman's eyes narrowed. He leaned back, tenting his fingers. "You think he was setting something up?" "I think he fired me because I would have fixed it," I said. "If the gas pressure spikes while the mixers are running, you get a blowout, a flashover." "A fire," Roman finished. "A big one. One that destroys the records office. One that triggers a massive insurance payout for a failing mill." "Exactly." Roman stood up and walked to a filing cabinet. "James, you didn't just brick the furnace. You might have just locked the evidence inside it." Roman wasted no time. He pulled up the public safety records and the schematics for the Clark steel mill on his massive dual-monitor setup. "Okay," Roman muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Let's look at the financials first. If he was planning arson, he needed a motive stronger than, 'I hate steel.'" He pulled up a business intelligence database. "Here it is. Clark Steel has been hemorrhaging cash since the old man died. They lost the Navy contract 3 months ago. They're leveraged to the hilt. If they miss the quarterly payment next week, the bank takes the keys." "So he needs cash fast," I said. "He needs a lot of cash," Roman corrected. "And look at this." He pointed to a document on the screen. 2 weeks ago, he updated the catastrophic loss policy. He increased the coverage on the physical plant by 200%. My blood ran cold. "He was going to burn it down," I whispered. "He was going to torch the place, blame it on old equipment or negligent staff, me, and walk away with $100 million. "But he had a problem," Roman said, spinning in his chair to face me. "You, the superintendent who lives and breathes safety. The guy who would have seen the pressure spike and hit the kill switch before the explosion happened. So, he had to get rid of me right before the trigger was pulled," I realized. "That's why he fired me on the catwalk. He needed me gone immediately." "And he needed a patsy," Roman added. "By firing you for negligence minutes before the place went up, he creates a paper trail. Look, insurance adjuster, I tried to fire the incompetent foreman, but he caused an accident on his way out." I felt sick. He was going to frame me for the fire. He was going to burn the mill, collect the money, and send me to prison for it. "But you threw a wrench in the gears," Roman said, a grim smile forming. "Or rather, a lock. By cutting the power to the mixers, you force the steel to harden. When that steel hardens, it seals the bottom of the furnace." "The gas inlets," I said, the technical realization hitting me. "The tuyores, the nozzles that inject the gas into the mix. They're at the bottom." "Exactly," Roman said, tapping the desk for emphasis. If he rigged those nozzles to blow, if he put incendiary devices or tampered valves down there, they are now encased in 50 tons of solid steel. He can't get them out, I said, leaning forward. He can't burn the evidence because the evidence is buried in a rock that requires dynamite to open. And he can't blow the factory now, Roman said, because with the mixers dead and the steel solid, there's no flow. If he tries to ignite the gas now, it'll just backfire into the supply lines. It won't look like an accident, it'll look like arson. Roman picked up his phone. Who are you calling? I asked. An old friend, Roman said. We need a lawyer, James, a specific kind of lawyer. One who eats sharks like Julian for breakfast. We're going to freeze him out, literally and legally. But the evidence is inside the steel, I said. How do we prove it? Roman looked at me, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. We don't need to get it out, James. We just need to make sure he can't destroy the block. That 50-ton lump of iron isn't scrap anymore. It's an evidence locker, and we're going to get a court order to preserve it. Kinsley didn't work out of a strip mall. Her office was on the 45th floor of a downtown spire, a place of glass and chrome that smelled of money and intimidation. Roman had called her a shark in high heels, and when she walked into the conference room, I saw exactly what he meant. She didn't shake my hand. She sat down, placed a single legal pad on the table, and looked at me with eyes that were terrifyingly intelligent. Roman tells me you turned a blast furnace into a bank vault, Kinsley said. Her voice was calm, precise. I locked out a mixer for safety, I corrected, sticking to the truth. The result was solidification. James, Roman interrupted, leaning forward, tell her about the south wall valves. I explained the gas pressure anomalies, Julian's erratic behavior, and the timing of my firing. I explained how the steel, once hardened, would encapsulate the bottom of the furnace, the exact spot where any incendiary sabotage would have been planted to trigger a gas explosion. Kinsley listened, tapping her pen. When I finished, she didn't smile. She looked hungry. So, she said, summarizing, if Julian Clark wants to destroy the evidence of his attempted insurance fraud, he has to melt or cut through 50 tons of high-carbon steel. He can't. And if he tries to claim the insurance money for the accident of the furnace freezing, the insurance company will demand a forensic analysis of the core to determine the cause of failure. Exactly, Roman said. He's checkmated. If he files a claim, they drill the core and find the rigged valves. If he doesn't file a claim, he goes bankrupt next week. But there's a third option, I said. He could try to scrap the furnace immediately, cut it up, melt it down in the secondary electric arc furnace, and hide the debris before anyone looks too close. Kinsley pulled a document from her briefcase. Not if we get there first. We are going to file an emergency injunction for the preservation of evidence. We aren't suing for wrongful termination yet. We are suing for workplace endangerment and whistleblower retaliation. That gives us the right to freeze the scene, literally. She stood up. I can get a judge to sign this in an hour. The solidified mass inside Blast Furnace 3 is now Material Exhibit A. If Julian Clark so much as scratches that steel with a grinder, he goes to federal prison for destruction of evidence. I looked at Roman. He was grinning. You realize what this means, James? Roman asked. You didn't just stop a fire. You created a time capsule. Whatever he did to those valves is preserved in iron forever. Let's go serve some papers, Kinsley said. We arrived at the mill at 3 on WC p.m. The change in the atmosphere was palpable even from the parking lot. The deep, chest-thumping hum of the plant was gone. The stacks weren't venting. The silence was heavy, broken only by the shouting of men near the loading dock. We walked in, me, Roman, Kinsley, and a court-appointed process server. Julian was standing by the base of the furnace, arguing with a man in a high-visibility vest. I recognized the vest. It was an independent insurance adjuster sent by the carrier. Julian looked frantic. His suit jacket was off, sweat staining his shirt. A mechanical failure, Julian was yelling. The mixer motor seized. The foreman was negligent. Mr. Clark, the adjuster said, looking at his clipboard. Motors seize all the time, but usually there are backup protocols. Why was the emergency gas purge not activated? I don't know, Julian stammered. That's why I fired the superintendent. Actually, Kinsley's voice cut through the air like a knife. You fired the superintendent before the failure occurred, which is why the failure occurred. Julian spun around. When he saw me, his face went from red to a pale, sickly white. You he hissed. "Security! Get them out of here!" "Touch them and you'll be in handcuffs before you hit the floor," Kinsley said, stepping forward. She nodded to the process server, who handed Julian a thick envelope. "This is a temporary restraining order and an evidence preservation mandate issued by the district court. Blast Furnace 3 is now a sealed crime scene." Julian looked at the papers, his hands shaking. "Crime scene? It's a broken machine." "It's a potential bomb," Roman said, stepping up next to the adjuster. "Hi, I'm Elias Thorne, forensic engineer. We believe the intake valves at the base of this unit were tampered with prior to the freeze. We have reason to believe that if Mr. Harris hadn't locked out the power, this building would be ashes right now." The insurance adjuster's ears perked up. "Tampered with? For what purpose?" "Arson," I said. I looked Julian dead in the eye. "Insurance fraud." The adjuster looked at Julian. The suspicion was instant. Insurance companies hate paying out, but they love finding fraud. "Mr. Clark," the adjuster said, his tone dropping to professional ice, "I'm going to need to seal this area. No scrapping, no repairs. We will need to bring in a core drilling team to sample the steel and inspect the valve connections at the base." "You can't drill it!" Julian screamed. "It's 50 tons of rock. It'll cost a fortune." "Then I guess it stays right where it is," I said, "as a monument to your management style." Julian looked at the massive silent furnace. He looked at the adjuster, taking photos. He looked at Kinsley. He realized the walls were closing in. The evidence was right there, trapped in the amber of the steel, and he couldn't touch it. The standoff lasted an hour. Kinsley and the adjuster went to the office to review the logs. Roman went to inspect the exterior gas lines. I stayed by the furnace. It was still radiating heat. It would stay warm for a week, but it was dead. I ran my hand along the cold steel of the outer shell. "James," I didn't turn around. I knew the voice. It was quieter now. Defeated. Julian walked up to me. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 hours. "What do you want, Julian?" "I can fix this," he said, his voice a low whisper. "I can fix the pension. I can reinstate it. Full benefits, back pay. I'll add a severance package. 2 years' salary." I turned to look at him. He was desperate. He was trying to buy his life back. "You can't buy me, Julian. 5 years' salary," he pleaded, stepping closer. "Just tell them you made a mistake. Tell them the lock was a prank. Tell them you saw the motor fail naturally. Just help me get the adjuster to sign off on the scrap order so we can cut this thing up and get it out of here." "So you can hide the rigged valves?" I asked. Julian flinched. He didn't deny it. "The company is going under, James. If I don't get the payout, everyone loses their jobs. Not just me. Adrian, Big Mike, all of them. Do you want that on your conscience?" I laughed. It was a dark, harsh sound. "Don't you dare put that on me," I said, stepping into his space. "You were going to burn this place down with them inside it. You were going to risk Adrian's life, my life, just to cash out. You didn't care about the jobs when you rigged the gas lines." "I would have evacuated everyone," Julian insisted, sweat dripping down his nose. "Like you evacuated me?" I pointed to the catwalk. "You fired me to save your own skin, and now the steel has hardened. You made your bed, Julian. Now you have to lie in it, or, in this case, drill through it. I'll give you $500,000, he whispered. "Cash. Today." I looked at him with pure pity. "Keep your money. You're going to need it for your defense attorney." I walked away. "James," he shouted after me, "you're destroying everything." I didn't look back. "I'm saving the truth. There's a difference." I walked out to the parking lot where Roman was waiting. "He tried to bribe you?" Roman asked. 5 years' salary, then $500,000. Roman nodded. "That means we were right. The valves are rigged. He knows that once they drill that core, it's over." "When do they drill?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," Roman said. "And the best part? The bank just called. They saw the injunction. They're freezing the company assets pending the investigation. Julian is broke." The sun was setting over the silent mill. It was the first time in 30 years the sky wasn't lit up by the glow of the blast. It was dark, but for the first time all day, I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. News travels fast in a steel town. By the time the town hall meeting started 3 days later, the story of the 50-ton safe had gone viral locally. The Union Hall was packed, standing room only. Men and women I had worked with for decades were there, along with their families. Julian stood on the stage, looking small. He was flanked by his cousin Josiah and a nervous-looking public relations consultant. He didn't have his arrogance anymore. He had the twitchy energy of a trapped animal. "We are committed to reopening," Julian said into the microphone, his voice echoing thinly. "The incident with the furnace was an unfortunate act of sabotage by a disgruntled employee. We are working with insurance to clear the blockage." "Liar!" someone shouted from the back. It was Big Mike. "Mr. Clark," Julian stammered. "Please, we need unity." Kinsley walked up to the microphone stand in the center of the aisle. The room went silent. She held a thick binder. "Mr. Clark," Kinsley said, her voice projecting clearly without shouting, "I am representing the workforce and Mr. James Harris. We just received the preliminary report from the Forensic Corps drilling team." Julian gripped the podium. "That is confidential company property." "It's public record in a criminal investigation," Kinsley corrected. She held up a photo, a high-resolution scan of a cross-section of steel. "This is what they found at the base of the furnace, encased in the solidified iron." She turned to the crowd. "They found 4 high-pressure intake valves that had been manually bypassed, and fused to the side of the main gas line, they found a remote-detonated incendiary switch. It was set to trigger at midnight on Tuesday." A gasp went through the room. "You tried to kill us," Adrian said, standing up near the front. He looked at Julian with pure horror. "I was on the night shift schedule. We all were." "It's a lie," Julian screamed, his composure finally breaking. "It's a plant. Harris put it there." "Mr. Harris was on the catwalk," Roman shouted from the side, stepping into the light. "The telemetry data confirms he never went to the basement level." "But your keycard, Julian? The logs show you were down there at 3 a.m. the night before." The crowd turned on him. It wasn't a mob, it was a wall of judgment. The police, who had been waiting at the back of the hall, started moving forward. Julian looked for an exit, but there was nowhere to go. The community he had tried to exploit was now the wall boxing him in. The fall of Clark Steel was as swift as a guillotine. With the evidence preserved in the steel safe, the insurance company denied the claim immediately. They also sued Julian for attempted fraud. The bank called in the loans the next day. Julian and Josiah were arrested on charges of insurance fraud, reckless endangerment, and attempted arson. 6 months later, I stood in the parking lot for the liquidation auction. It was a bittersweet day. The mill was dead. The silence was permanent now, but the air was clean. "Lot 405, the auctioneer rattled over the loudspeaker. "Overhead crane assembly, sold to Nexus Industrial." I watched as the assets were stripped away. The machines I had maintained were going to other plants, other lives. "You okay, James?" I turned to see Kinsley and Roman. They were smiling. "I'm fine," I said. "It's just strange. 30 years. "You got the check?" Roman asked. I patted my jacket pocket. "I did. Because Julian's assets were frozen and seized, the court had ordered a priority payout to the employees. We didn't get everything, but thanks to Kinsley's whistleblower retaliation suit, I got my full severance, my back pay, and a significant settlement for damages. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to fix the boat. Enough to breathe." "What happens to the furnace?" I asked, looking at the massive brick structure looming over the yard. "Nobody wants it," Roman laughed. "It's a 50-ton paperweight. The new owners of the land are going to turn it into a historical marker. The iron evidence locker. It's literally too heavy to move." I looked at it one last time. My monument. I had built it not with a blueprint, but with a single decisive refusal to be a victim. "Come on," I said, turning my back on the factory for the last time. "I'm buying lunch." The lake is quiet this morning. The only sound is the water lapping against the hull of my fishing boat, the Martha II. It's been a year since the mill closed. Julian is currently serving an 8-year sentence in a minimum security facility. Josiah turned state's witness and got probation. But he'll never work in this town again. I didn't retire in luxury, but I retired in peace. I spend my days fixing small engines for the neighbors and fishing. I sleep through the night now. No phantom alarms, no heat rash. The life twist wasn't just that Julian was trying to burn the place down. It was that, in his arrogance, he handed me the weapon to stop him. He thought firing me was the final nail in my coffin, but it was the key to his own cell. By forcing me to lock out that machine, he ensured the evidence would outlive his lies. I'm sitting on my porch now, coffee in hand, looking at the sunrise. The temperature is a perfect 65 degrees. Some advice from an old foreman. Throughout this ordeal, I made mistakes. I trusted that the system would protect me just because I was loyal. I ignored the red flags, the new management's secrecy, the odd questions about gas lines, because I didn't want to believe my world was ending. I thought if I just kept my head down and worked hard, I'd be safe. I was wrong. But I learned something valuable. Your expertise is your leverage. If you are ever in a situation where you feel something is wrong, where safety is being ignored for profit, or where you are being pushed out, stop and think. Don't let them rush you into a panic. Panic is where you make mistakes. Clarity is where you win. Follow the protocol. Malicious compliance is a powerful tool. I didn't break the machine. I followed the safety rule to the letter. That protected me legally. Document everything. If I hadn't kept my own logs, or if I hadn't had witnesses like Adrian, it would have been my word against theirs. Know your allies. You can't fight a corporate machine alone. You need a Roman, an expert, and a Kinsley, a fighter. Don't be too proud to ask for help. The world is full of Julians, people who think they can burn down your hard work for a quick buck. Don't let them. Sometimes the best way to fight fire isn't with water, it's with cold, hard steel.